Talking Star Wars presents Talking Avatar.
Well, hello, Star Wars fans.
And fans of other media that may be related to Star Wars.
So, as normal, I am Alex, and this is Connor.
Hello.
For those who have listened to our podcast for the last year, we have talked about many Star Wars related topics, from character insights to force powers to other areas. But our focus has always been on the power of storytelling and on the analyzing the media and universe as a whole. Before we launch season 2 of Talking Star Wars, we wanted to take an interregnum, a break, an interlude, if you will, to explore another media franchise that is very different than Star Wars, but is also one of the only media franchises that's similar in enough ways to make it interesting for us to discuss. And also because Connor and I really like it.
Oh, yeah. And if you listen to our 50th episode on the media that Star Wars has inspired, you'll find that The Last Airbender Avatar, not the Blue People Avatar, as we should make clear in pretty much every episode that we have moving forward. Uh, the Last Airbender story structure, character types, even its supernatural power system harkens back to Star Wars, and it allows for a really engaging new media that isn't based on a comic book, radio. I was going to say podcast, but I don't think podcasts were on the radio. But it's this media that exists, continues, and is all interconnected in all of its different pieces of media. So you won't necessarily find a comic book adaptation of the first season of The Last Airbender, but you will find continuations from the end of the series.
Yeah, so our next 12 episodes are going to be season 1.5, exploring some of the themes, ideas, and the most powerful parts of the world of Avatar: The Last Airbender and its sequel series, The Legend of Korra.
So, how do we introduce this concept to people who might not be as familiar? I would imagine those who listen are Star Wars fans, and we might not have that same crossover with Airbender fans.
Yeah, so let's just set the stage for the similarities with Star Wars, and then we'll do just a general overview of the series. Um, so, both Avatar: The Last Airbender and Star Wars were their inception was due to visual media, movies and shows, respectively. They are each set in a secondary world dominated by both growing technology and supernatural abilities that are able to be wielded by select individuals. They to contain a fusion of typical Western and also Eastern influences in both their philosophy, character growth, and setting. And they also follow classical hero's journey mechanics with a chosen one who must face specific challenges that they can overcome with the help of a cast of supporting characters. Uh, and additionally, in both Star Wars and the world of Avatar and the franchise level as a whole, there is, in the secondary world, there is an expanded universe of interconnected media that is all canon to each other and supports and builds up the same story themes, characters, and ongoing legacy.
So we have other pieces of media that might tie into Star Wars visually, different science fiction pieces, but there's nothing that has the same sort of heart, the same sort of scope that Avatar: The Last Airbender does. Even if it has less volume as far as how long it runs, it's still incredibly impactful in demonstrating this new lens of the hero's journey.
In a final way that they are similar, well, that we'll talk about right now, is both Star Wars and Avatar: The Last Airbender are stories that are meant to be enjoyed by those of all ages. So, Avatar, perhaps a little more than Star Wars, is originally aimed at a younger audience, as is some Star Wars media, such as the Clone Wars. But both have a following and have a sort of a universal appeal of all ages, where it does not seek to pander, except in some instances, to the 3 to 4 year old demographic and can be enjoyed by those of all ages and doesn't exactly revel in the kind of just deliberate grit and violence and I would say more direct adult themes that something like a John Wick might or a R-rated movie might.
Mhm.
Though more on Avatar Kyoshi later.
I was going to say both franchises both grow with their audiences to some degree. I know that George Lucas will always say that Star Wars is meant for kids, but if you take a look at the Clone Wars animated series, you can definitely see the maturity in that show develop, as it does in Avatar, where by the third and final season of that show, and really the entirety of Korra, they're dealing with much more mature concepts than they would be in the very first season in the opening episode when they're penguin sledding.
Well, yes, and when George Lucas then sold Star Wars, we then did get stories that were deliberately more adult, as I think we're starting to get in the Avatar universe with Kyoshi. So we now see Andor, because of course the tense political thriller about prison escapes, systemic injustices, betrayal, and giving up all of your ideals for a nebulous political cause that will consume you in the end. Totally appropriate for a 5-year-old, right? Um, so so that is our reason for exploring Avatar: The Last Airbender this way. We find it to be a compelling series. We find it to be exploring many important themes. We find its execution of those ideas, like with Star Wars, to be mostly good, some areas for improvement, and we just find the tapestry of the setting and secondary world that it inhabits to be rich enough to be able to tell nuanced stories in a way that all good speculative fiction does by using its supernatural or more than normal elements to enhance the storytelling it is doing to reveal more about people themselves.
Mm-hmm. So I suppose to give just the briefest of overviews around what Avatar is all about. I mean, the opening credits of the show give a very fair explanation of what's happening, but the long and short of it is that this fantasy world is dominated by four different cultures, each of which can manipulate a different element: fire, earth, air, and water. Not everyone is born with this ability, but we generally have different cultural groupings. And there is one being known as the Avatar who is able to manipulate all four of these elements and is also responsible for the physical and spiritual well being of the entire planet. And in this particular point in time, the planet is not at a good point where the Fire Nation has overwhelmed the rest of the world, wiped out most of the air nomads, and is slowly but surely taking full control over the planet. And it is up to the last Airbender, who has been in hibernation for 100 years, in order to learn more about this current modern world with the help of two water tribe teams, and then seek out to put a stop to the Fire Nation. And that is I think, the most simple bread and butter description of what's happening. But uh, to get into the different characters and the different sort of interconnected character plots, it makes that concept of stop the bad guy uh, truly interesting, and it's a goal that lasts the entire 3 season run of the show.
The original 3 seasons of Avatar: The Last Airbender ran from 2005 to 2008, so in a tighter
Mhm.
61 episodes and a much tighter time frame than the first 3 movies of Star Wars, which took 1977 to 1983,
Mhm.
exploring the character arc and hero's journey of one main character, Aang. But and then we had a sequel series, The Legend of Korra,
Mhm.
that ran for 4 seasons and of almost 50 episodes that ran from 2012 to 2014.
It's
And
important to note that the reason why we have a second series called The Legend of Korra, who is Korra, the character of the Avatar is one of a spiritual role, where it's
they,
reincarnated from one generation to the next once the previous Avatar passes away.
yes, and Forced Ghost style, the avatars can all speak to their past lives.
Mhm.
And that is not the only parallel here. Again, we have a chosen hero with special powers who is destined to bring balance to a world out of balance. I mean, we have Luke Skywalker, who is destined to be the chosen one his father was not, and to defeat the Emperor is literally, one of the last Jedi.
Mhm.
Or the first Jedi in a new order. You have a supporting cast of characters supporting the hero on this ongoing journey. You have
Each of which get their own character development as well. And if you look at the first two films in the Star Wars franchise, you can see characters like Han Solo getting a character arc, and then he stands around a bunker for Return of the Jedi. But regardless, we still have that idea of the supporting characters getting their own personalities developed and reaching certain arcs of their own, which we don't see in a lot of other typical media.
Yes, and we start in a rich secondary world in Avatar. It's of different lands and cultures and backgrounds with spirits and traditions and bending powers. We'll get more into the supernatural bending of elements. But in the same way as the opening crawl of A New Hope tells us about a small band of rebels striking for their hidden base, we have the Fire Nation, our antagonist political entity, similar to the Empire in Avatar, winning and about to crush all resistance to them and win this 100-year war they've been going on. So, in both instances, our hero is on the ropes from the beginning. They have to defeat the Emperor. They must defeat the Fire Lord, before the rebellion is crushed or before the Fire Nation conquers the last vestiges of resistance.
And one interesting disparity between The Last Airbender and Star Wars is that in The Last Airbender, you feel this dire sense of urgency, where if our heroes do not accomplish their goals and overcome the evil by a certain point in time, it is more than likely that the villain will win. Whereas in Star Wars, the villain is the main power, so it's a constant fight the rebellion has to put up against. There isn't a ticking clock element so much.
I would say there's a ticking clock element in each individual movie, and more so, the Death Star sort of fulfills the same role that Sozin's Comet does, which will make sense to those who have watched it and will make no sense until we get to it later. But in both cases, the villainous power has a literal superweapon, one being a technological terror, one being supernatural in origin, that will grant them victory if certain weaknesses are not overcome. So you could certainly make an argument for the Death Star and Sozin's Comet, pretty much providing the same narrative function.
What's fun in Avatar is that we are introduced to this concept, I believe, in Season 2, and it doesn't occur until Season 3, so we have much wait time? Or does Sozin's Comet occur at the end of Season?
No, Sozin's Comet we get, third episode.
Of Season 3?
No, first. Oh, when it appears?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is foreshadowed from the very start of the series, and then shows up at the very end.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the Death Star is mentioned in the opening crawl. A New Hope is destroyed by the end of that movie.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're like, you know what, we like that so much we built it again. And then, in fact, we like that so much we built it a third time with an entire planet.
Mm-hmm.
We called it something different this time. But, really it's the Death Star. We like Death Stars.
So you can see where we're pointing a little bit to the fact that as a subsequent piece of media made after Star Wars, there is perhaps some benefit that The Last Airbender received in being able to have the creators plan out a full-fledged series and show Bible rather than producing a single season once at a time, at least at this point. We'll talk more about story structure in the future.
So yes, that is Avatar, The Last Airbender. It is the struggle of Aang, our substitute for Luke, though there's also Zuko, our evil Luke, who is on a path to defeat the Fire Lord and stop the Fire Nation from destroying all resistance, much like the Empire is trying to maintain an iron fist on the galaxy and destroy the Rebel Alliance.
Zuko's kind of like Kylo Ren, just written 10 years before Kylo Ren was created.
And let's be honest, whatever you think of Kylo Ren's character, the character arc of Zuko, banished Prince of the Fire Nation, is superior to that of most character arcs in most media. So,
if we have one spotlight character, I would definitely want to spotlight Zuko because he spends the first season as a really a direct antagonist, always pursuing heroes, always trying to learn from his father figure, Uncle Iroh. It isn't until the second season that we start to see him become disillusioned and just a great fight with his inner conflicts in order to, decide to continue pursuing Aang and his friends in order to captured them, returned them to his father, and earned back his just ever so important honor. And interestingly enough, not to pose any spoilers, but we have him make the wrong choice in season 2. Have to deal with the consequences of success and learn from that in order to reject his father's attention and love, noticing that he is a vile man. That's a character arc that we don't normally get in media. The turncoat, turned good guy, definitely not done to this depth.
Yeah, so much like The Empire Strikes Back, the second season of Avatar allows the villains to win, which is not something that most media, especially media aimed at children, would have the chutzpah to do. So Connor and I are definitely fans of the mature storytelling that took to look at all of the pieces on the board arrayed against the heroes and decide, you know what, they do their best, they score some minor wins, but they are ultimately defeated. Things end grimly. Luke needs a new hand. Our Aang has some new scars and has lost some of his most powerful abilities because he got shot by lightning. So that is sort of almost the hinge point on which the quality of the season turns, is having the gumption and the mature storytelling to give consequences to the hero's actions in ways that Star Wars will also do. Luke is not ready to face Vader, he loses a hand. Mm-hmm. The heroes try to stop the Fire Lord too soon, their army is defeated and all their allies are captured.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Return of the Jedi is not seen as the strongest Star Wars film. I have a personal soft spot for it, but we begin this movie with a sort of espionage, heroes in disguise motif in order to save their friend Han Solo. We see that somewhat in the third season of Avatar, where they don't have an initial goal right away, but the Fire Nation has won, and in order to find Aang a new firebending teacher and help him stop the Fire Lord, they need to go incognito in the Fire Nation, and they have an entire arc where they are in disguise and trying to infiltrate, fit in with the Fire Nation, and learn that not everyone in this part of the world is a villainous creep. They're just people, like everyone else. We don't see that in Jabba's palace. Everyone in Jabba's palace is a vile, disgusting cretin.
Yeah, so we could draw even more parallels between Avatar and Star Wars. Some of that is just because they're both engaging storytelling, stories told with a cast of characters, so they're natural, but there are other elements directly, such as Appa, the flying bison, basically being Chewbacca if he was the Millennium Falcon, and also had a character.
I don't even want to get into Appa's arc. If you ever wanted to, if you have a hard time when animals are in distress, you will definitely feel the feels when watching season 2 of Avatar.
Yeah, and then to take a broad step, and another reason that we're exploring Avatar here is that we have themes and stories that touch on very sensitive and important topics. So we're not just monster of the week, children must use the power of friendship to overcome obstacles. We never devolve into that level of storytelling.
It's not a MacGuffin or a martial arts tournament that they have to go through. They're seeking out knowledge, expertise, and skill. They don't need the special stones in order to defeat the Fire Nation.
Yeah, and sometimes just trying to survive. And we touch on aspects of family, familial abuse, genocide, trying to move on after trauma and loss, redemption and forgiveness, and refusing redemption and forgiveness.
That idea of trauma, forgiveness, redemption is ingrained in the entire series. Even from the very beginning of season 1, we see Aang's reaction to learning that his people are gone. That he made the choice 100 years ago to run away from his fate and from his responsibility, and accidentally found himself frozen in an iceberg, as you do. But in the duration, his inactivity allowed for an entire, quarter of the world's populace in order to be wiped out. I don't know if that's what it's like numbers-wise. I would imagine the air nomads are a little bit more secluded and not as wide and flourishing a culture as, say, the Earth Nation, but we have to see him deal with this from very early on, and it's something that he has to continually buck up against, this task that he's been asked to do that he either doesn't feel fit or he doesn't see uh, fits his moral code.
Yeah, so much as Luke had to grow into the role of Jedi, Aang must grow into the role of the Avatar. And both of them at some point don't want the burden and want to return to their old life in some way, but then must accept that um, it's the Campbellian hero's journey. If you refuse the call knows where you live,
Mhm.
and so you must take up the hero's call, or the consequences will grow ever more dire. And so then you must descend into the world navel, obtain the sacred wisdom, and return to defeat the villains that are facing people in daily life.
And not to get into the true spoiler of the ending, but both Luke and Aang succeed not by embracing violence, but by embracing another calling, something that is what their masters did not ask them to do. We have the entire episode where Aang is talking to his past lives, saying, "You know what? You should really kill this Phoenix King, the Fire Lord."
Yeah, much as Yoda and Obi-Wan tell Luke the only way to, so you must kill your father, you must kill the Emperor, and kill the Emperor, using him as a weapon, much in the same way that Aang's past lives wish him to do. And both heroes want to seek a third option. They would like to
Mhm.
seek a way that does not just sow more death and destruction, but allows growth, redemption, and staying true to their own ideals in a galaxy or world that has grown ever more corrupt, damaged, and dark.
Mhm. It makes me like this is just a total offshoot and probably will be cut, but it makes me think of the ending of Avengers Endgame, where the solution was just for Iron Man to kill Thanos and all of his men. Um, I guess
Yes,
sometimes you have to eliminate a true evil, but it seemed like Thanos was uh, had enough reason to reason with. Thanos is
yeah,
right. Hashtag.
yeah, and I'm not opposed to a story where sometimes the villain must be killed. And in fact, as we see, Korra is much more willing to kill her villains, and even in the times when they survive, um, that wasn't usually through to deliberate. They need to find redemption on Korra's half,
Mhm.
because Aang's next life is not him, and is much more willing to resort to violence when
Right.
necessary, just her own millstone to bear.
Mhm.
Yeah, and just we've been talking a lot about the original series, Avatar: The Last Airbender, compared to the original trilogy of Star Wars movies: A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. But of course, there is media outside of that. There's an
Mhm.
entire sequel series to Avatar: The Last Airbender, exploring its own set of themes, much like the prequel trilogy in Star Wars then dives into things like political machinations and how can fascism rise in a state of war? How can the Jedi Order, committed to light and good and decency, still have a blind spot and fall after they are betrayed due to the effects of a war? How can love between two people end up being toxic to the degree that it destroys both of them? We have other themes that go in a different direction in the Legend of Korra. We see is embracing responsibility enough if you don't understand it? Um, is physical attraction is not the same as love? Um, what happens to a society after colonization? How does a post-colonial identity arise and affect the fabric of international and societal level relations? And how do the structures of power work in a setting where some people have access to enormous amounts of personal power at the flick of a wrist, and other people do not?
Not to crap on the Star Wars sequel trilogy, but it doesn't do these things. It doesn't so much show the political landscape. It doesn't so much show. Well, I will say what it does do is it deals with the idea of legacy, which Korra is steeped in quite a bit.
Yeah, and the sequel trilogy of Star Wars does suffer an identity crisis, which, if you'd like to know more about, go
Mhm.
see our several episodes about the sequel trilogy, its pros and its cons in the Star Wars setting. But there are still the themes to explore, even if
Mhm.
they're occasionally heavy-handed, such as um, can are profit-driven motives always going to result in an increase in war? Is revenge the best way to overcome a cycle of violence? Uh,
Where's the line between hero and human? We look at it so much with Aang, where he can't be in The Legend of Korra because he unfortunately has to pass in order for Korra to be reborn in the Avatar cycle. But we see some legacy characters who are quite aged and old, but provide some insight into how the heroes of old grew and developed. We have some memories that Korra is able to tap into to see from Aang's perspective, but we deal with Aang's children, who have the most direct line into what Aang was like in the gap between shows.
and I will say the character of Luke in The Last Jedi having to realize, and The Rise of Skywalker, having to realize that Rey must grow beyond his teachings and figure out her own path in a galaxy that's different than the one that Luke gave him. He can give advice, but he cannot control her actions, is the same realization that several mentor characters in both Avatar and Korra have, where the student must grow beyond the master and make their own choices. They can no longer be controlled, such as Toph Beifong by the time Korra rolls around. So we have that is a thread that runs. So it's like, what does mentorship mean? What does the mentor owe and is owed by individuals? So that is another theme that both franchises and both stories touch on.
And I will say, just as a brief review, so Korra was not designed like Avatar. It was not. There was not a series book written for multiple seasons. It was a one season commitment, followed by another one season commitment, followed by two final seasons that were sort of butchered in the release because Nickelodeon did not, for some reason, want this show to flourish and decided a weird hybrid online on the air release date will work. But
So much in the same way, you have to look at the sequel trilogy to be like, everyone here is trying their hardest, but
Mhm.
they was not given clear direction by the powers that be with the two different directors. So Korra sometimes lacks the same thorough threads that would have been possible had they known it was all going to come together.
I don't want to quash it too much, though, because I believe that each individual season does an immense amount of work in order to, like, first and foremost, demonstrate how this world has changed. Because, just like Star Wars, the world is a character where it is made up of all of these diverse parts. The physical world in the Avatar and Korra series is its own beast. We see how it is manipulated by politics, by war, and Korra does a fantastic job showing the fallout of that and how uh, the society shifts in phases. Each season has a direct consequence on the following, and it culminates in a season that is almost entirely about the politics of uh, someone in power who thinks that they should have the authority, and it's comes from the Earth Kingdom of all places, which was kind of our more benign sect in the Last Airbender, our more inactive group. So it's just a fantastic way in order to demonstrate how a world can change in unexpected ways, which we don't again get in a lot of other media.
Yeah, and Avatar from the bat is always saying, yes, we have our evil empire, the Fire Nation, but it is comprised of humans. The leadership may, in fact, be um, making decisions that cast them as evil, if we want to view them. But it is comprised of individuals who are humanized at almost every turn, even when they're engaging in terrible acts. And some of our most petty, cruel people in the series come from other areas. The most progressive and accepting of others on a personal level is the Fire Nation, while they're engaging in brutal genocide and destruction. Whereas the societies under threat, the Water Tribes, Earth Kingdom, are very tied to misogynistic and patriarchal traditions, or putting their head in the sand and ignoring what's going on, or engaging in intersenine politics that just leave them unable to defend themselves. And in the same way, I think that um, it had again had the benefit of Star Wars coming first.
Mm-hmm.
Star Wars dabbles in this when it explores characters like Saw Gerrera, extremist rebel who was then kicked out of the Rebel Alliance. When the Rebel Alliance that becomes the New Republic and is not the perfect government it was cracked up to be. When we see people who are actually devoted to the Empire because it did have a material impact and improvement on their lives. So Star Wars gains some of that nuance later, but is definitely leaning more on the edge of this is the evil empire, they must be defeated, and
Mm-hmm.
don't feel terribly badly about the million of people who are on the Death Star. Some of which you must do because when you have a planet-destroying weapon that just killed, billions of people in Alderaan.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Everyone is complicit in that space
yeah,
station.
there's a different level of complicity between, part of an invading army on behest of their king and their lord and assisting in genocide. It's the difference between, um, you know, okay, I'm going to attack Amashu, or I'm going to be on the airship fleet that is going to use Sozin's Comet to literally commit genocide. The line appears to be genocide here, actually, for us, where you then become automatically complicit in the actions of your superior.
But even in Avatar, we get an episode where our characters have to deal with one of the Fire Nation soldiers who isn't a part of the army anymore, but could say they were just following orders and dealing with cruelty, but at the same time, were directly responsible for some of our characters' most tragic moments. Even the character of Uncle Iroh, the warm, cuddly, funny, gentle man, was it the Dragon of the East?
Yeah, so
Yeah,
he was once General Iroh, the Dragon of the West,
Dragon of the
laid
West.
siege to Ba Sing Se for 600 days and resulted in the deaths of hundreds, if not thousands, as a brutal conqueror. And the fact that he is now mellowed out in his old age and is trying to make up for his mistakes, which does not erase his past actions, and he is very aware of this. There is no perfect paragon of virtue in the Avatar universe, much as the same way that Luke almost falls to the dark side. Force chokes some Gamorreans, makes out with his sister.
As you
Um,
do.
no, that one wasn't his fault. And perhaps makes a choice to not just directly kill the Emperor that could have resulted in the deaths if many of his friends had his gamble about his father not paid off. So our characters in Avatar are doing the same. It is a messy, uncomfortable world without any easy answers, and trying to find the easy answers usually results in just more pain. And that's looking at you, Avatar Korra. The easy answer: avoid it. It's not going to work. You gotta do the work.
So yeah, so we spend some time taking a look at the direct connections between one trilogy of stories to another, and then I wish I could call Korra a trilogy. I don't like the second season that much, but it does have some fantastic episodes. And moving on from that, though, Avatar is not just visual media. It exists in this expanded lore, and like we said, it's not something that's just ancillary. It's truly tied into the series and it solves a lot of mysteries that were left unsaid within the actual show itself.
Yeah, much in the same way that Star Wars has, supporting shows and comics and novels and video games to tie in. Avatar has a smaller number, but of high quality comics and novels and other ancillary media that ties in and expands upon its characters, which we will reference when appropriate to talk about, what antagonists, story structure, the evolution of a setting.
So yes, if there are other topics that you have in mind or similar media that might give you the same feels as Star Wars, please feel free to share. We are enjoyers of media and enjoy learning things and discovering new material that we're not used to yet. But otherwise, thank you so much for taking this journey with us for a year to talk about Star Wars, and we hope you have just as fun listening to us babble on about The Last Airbender.
And if Avatar: The Last Airbender isn't your thing, if the parallels and analysis of these two franchises together is just, I'm here for just Star Wars, yeah, just join us a few months into 2024. At the start of 2024, we will start putting out our second season of just Star Wars focused episodes. Just pay attention to our feed, and they will be up there. This is just for those who want to listen to our experiments and might find both the combination and comparison of both series compelling.
And if you haven't watched The Last Airbender yet, what are you doing? You should. You should. You
Yeah,
should
I mean,
watch it.
it is in the top 10 list of like media that could be transformative and um, reaches rich and meaningful conclusions based on everything that was built before. So go watch it now. I think it's on
Paramount
Netflix.
Plus.
Paramount Plus now.
I think so.
Find a DVD in a bargain bin.
Go to eBay. You'll find it.
Just watch it. 61 episodes, 23 minutes each. We'll wait while you get back.
Until then.